You might be familiar with the concept of authority being a source of power, but have you ever thought about how the source of power itself can also cause its suppression? Authority and power are two discrete but related concepts. According to a contributor at Political Science Notes, authority is the institutionalized right to enroll power. Authority functions on a basic structure consisting of superordinates and subordinates. Superordinates have the right to decide and create rational decisions with the expectations that their subordinates will accept and follow through with the decisions they make. Simultaneously, authority is dependent on the subordinate as well. For the person's power to be legitimized, the subordinate actualizes the demands of the superior. Hence, they must view the commands as fair and rational. If they don't, such abuses of power from an authority figure often form rebellious environments. Nevertheless, to maintain a harmonious structure of authority, it must be communicated in a way that is meaningful and comprehensible for the subordinates. People often wrongly construe authority and influence as identical concepts. Political leaders constantly seek to expand their influence, which they know is much more flexible, fluid, and indefinite than power itself, but at times more effective. Therefore, in order to stabilize their influence, they transform it into authority by grabbing hold over institutions and other structure of authority, such as state and law that the public recognize and accept. However, something that sources power can also source its suppression. People with authority tend to twist truths in consolidating their power, and in doing so, manipulate people into submission. Take the US-Iraq War as an example. During the aftermath of 9/11, the United States immediately struck back at the terrorist masterminds. But the Bush administration was convinced that Saddam Hussein's dictatorship in Iraq was stockpiling weapons of mass destruction against the US without any basis or credible evidence, and chose to justify their actions for going to war on an Iraqi informant. These claims were soon discredited, but the US had already begun moving and launched a war against Iraq that lasted 8 years and resulted in a devastating casualty count for the Americans and even more for Iraq. Ultimately, George Bush was able to justify why the US went to war against Iraq by feeding them with false information about an imminent threat of Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction. His claim of receiving inside information from an Iraqi informant and the uranium documents were discovered to be obvious fakes, but even so, the Bush administration was adamant to purge any threat that was placed in front of them. The US government basically abused their position in power to relieve themselves of the paranoia of Saddam Hussein's regime. This is just one of the numerous cases that have been dissected, which reveal how people in power use various methods to deceive and manipulate the public, and how these people are not as responsible with the amount of authority they were given as we might think.